Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Say Report. I'm your host, Devin Decker, and joining me, my host companion, Sejan Sarowick. Sejan?
Hey everybody, what's going on?
Well, I really hope that listeners of the Say Report have enjoyed us talking about our time in school, college specifically, because as of this recording, you and I officially graduated from a collegiate program that produced a Tony winner.
Hey, look at that. Yeah, the Tonys that never were. We didn't really talk about them last week.
Well, we recorded before they happened,
Oh, that's
and
right, because we recorded on Sunday of last week, so yeah, we didn't get the chance. So here we go. All right, we are on the ball this
yeah,
time. Look at our
we,
list. We
we
dropped in
handled
one.
this one. I mean, we did record our very special episode about Seinfeld, and while it would be semi-appropriate to discuss the Tonys for a couple of reasons in relationship to Seinfeld, no, that's not the case right now or right here. It's the Tony time. And the big thing, I have two big things, and then I will yield the floor to you. Three big things. Sorry. The first thing is we did just record a Seinfeld episode, and I called the penultimate episode the Puerto Rican Day Parade like 18 times. The name of the episode is just the Puerto Rican Day, so apologies for mislabeling that episode. I hope you can forgive me. Thing number two is I don't we went to school with somebody who won a Tony, and that should have been the third thing. The third thing is you need to remind me when the Tonys are happening next year, because in terms of awards, it's the one we discussed the least on this show, which seems strange considering our backgrounds and how
I
we
think
know
it
each
might be
other.
because out of all of them, it's the one I most respect and don't want to sully
That's a good point.
it.
But of all the award shows, the day after the Tonys is the most annoying for me on social media. Probably again because of our background. Yeah. So that's it. The floor is yours.
Yeah.
I yield
Well,
the floor
no,
to
no, no.
you.
So this is an important one for us to talk about, though, no matter what, whether we usually do or don't,
Yeah.
because they some so so for anybody that's been living on Mars, so I guess Elon Musk for the last like 3 years. Let me. This is just for you, Elon. There's been a pandemic, and one of we've all been greatly affected by it. A lot of industries have been, but one of the ones that has been affected in perhaps the most like life-altering way going forward has definitely been live theater, right? Like live shows, live entertainment. Let's put it that way, right? And obviously the biggest player in that is Broadway. So some weird stuff has gone down the last couple of years in terms of how Broadway has chosen to handle things. A lot of good stuff, honestly. They were one of the first industries to say like everybody's going home, but everybody's getting paid. Like we're going to make sure that people are taken care of as much as we can. And then eventually that started to kind of run dry, which all wells do, right? And so they also started putting together a lot of different ways that people could go back to work or get money if they were not. It's been really interesting, and we have not given enough fair due to the theater industry the last couple of years with everything that we've talked about regarding the pandemic. One of the biggest like casualties, questionable contents like that has had to like one of the weirdest things they've had to deal with is how do you do a Tony Award for a season that didn't happen? Well, apparently what you do is you go back 2 years and you pick out the group of people that wouldn't have been qualified for the Tonys that year because they came out too late and didn't get a Tonys the year after because everything went to shit, and you just kind of act like nothing happened in between apparently, and you act like it's not weird that there's what, like not even a half a dozen shows worth recognizing.
Yeah. I think my favorite part about the Tonys was I saw that the Tonys Presents Broadway is Back on my guide, on my DVR, whatever it is called, right? The channel guide, right? Because we don't have TV Guide channel anymore. We just have the channel guide. And to me, that just felt like, oh, okay, the Tonys would have been happening this week if normal things had happened, if the
Right.
world hadn't got disrupted. So they're using this time that they already had booked with CBS to do like a grand celebration of the theater and sort of a coming out that you can go back to Broadway. Broadway is back open. And they'll probably have some like segments where people from Broadway, like well-known stars, are going to talk about some of the protocol so you can feel safe spending your hundreds of dollars to see these shows again. And then, as it turns out, the next day, see, I was surprised too when I found out that the Tonys had happened as well, and not
Yeah.
just some sort of advertising. I mean, and all award shows are just advertising for whatever industry. Don't let anyone ever tell you differently. I don't think we've ever told you differently on this show, but it's something to reiterate. Understand that the award show process is just a form of advertising,
If it
as
was
well
not a form
as
of advertising, they would do this in private. There
right.
is no reason for us to necessarily watch these. There is no benefit to the home viewer of these things, especially something like the Tonys, because it's not like I can then go out and rent the thing the next day, or go out and see the thing or go look for it on a streaming service or a television channel, right? Like the Tonys is more than any, perhaps just one large commercial for Broadway, and always has been. And there's no more evidence of that than the fact that you actually don't get to see the first 2 hours of the awards. I guess if you had Paramount Plus this year, you could have if you wanted to.
Right.
But they purposely like held off on putting any of the fun stuff, like the musical numbers and the big like Broadway style on the whole Broadway spin that they put on the Tonys. One of the reasons I like the Tonys so much is that it's a big night show put on by people that always put on big night shows, unlike like the Oscars and the Emmys, where they can't ever seem to figure out what to do with themselves. But anyway, but that idea being that there are 2 hours of all awards programs that are sometimes even like the day before or 2 or 3 days before that you're not privy to. All of the awards for the technical guys, all of the awards for the key grips and all that shit behind the scenes. Like, and so the fact that like they don't put that in front of your eyeballs should let you know that the part they are putting in front of your eyeballs is carefully cultivated for a particular reason.
Right. I mean, like, let's take the fact that my father will go out and watch every movie that was nominated for Best Picture, and then he complains to me about something like Parasite, and he's like, why did I watch that? And I'm like, well, you wanted to watch it. I didn't ask you to watch it, and you wanted to watch it because it won Best Picture. So, like, don't get mad at the advertising you consume when it advertises something you're not interested in. I cannot stress that enough, Father.
Yeah, but so the Tonys are just one big ad, correct?
All right, and but then it's this thing where after like the Oscars, right? I'll talk about it with people, usually face to face. I don't really post anything on social media anymore. And even when the Oscars were going on, the most I did was when I did like a menu for the Best Picture winners or the Best Picture nominees to like have at my Oscar party, which was always like a small affair. I think the biggest Oscar party we ever had was maybe 10 people in the house at one time. So like, and that's the furthest I ever got. So I've never been as award show focused, but something about the Tonys, and I think it's specifically the fact that those first 2 hours aren't televised, though, as you pointed out, they were available on Paramount Plus this year, and my father got very confused because he taped Broadway's Back, and he's like, it was just an hour, and like, it was nothing, but then I go to Paramount Plus, and it's 3 hours, and I'm like, yeah, that's how they did it this year, because they didn't want to eat up space to show the entire award show. They just wanted to show the last hour and tell you what won the best play of the year. I don't know. I'm sorry. But there was a lot of discussion on my social media channels and a lot of reminders of why I'm not necessarily connected to the theater world as much as I used to be. Read at all. And I don't know. I just don't know. It was strange because a person that you definitely went to school with the individual who won, right?
Yes.
For at least I think half a year. The other person that I've talked to about this is Will, and he said I believe he came in halfway through my year studying abroad. And I recalled that because he was in that one class I was in with you guys. And it was funny because he was the new hotness. Will by that time was old news. Like, we had a British kid last semester. Now we have this guy who one day is going to win a Tony. I mean, nobody knew that, but yeah. So that was something, right? Because everybody had something to say because they had attended or worked with this person who won what is the major award of the industry that we went to school for.
Right.
And then the other thing is the Tonys, and as Sejan already pointed out, it was a truncated listing. It was not everything that appeared on Broadway. They for the first time that I've heard it, and again, I try to avoid the Tonys for a lot of reasons, and I think I've made most of them pretty clear. But this was the year that it kind of fell syndrome to the award too white hashtag.
Okay, yeah.
And a lot of people had a lot to say about that. The last thing that it felt like pollution, like above all else, was the fact that Jagged Little Pill won for Best Book. I saw no less than 10 posts about that. And the real fun thing about that one, here's some inside baseball for theater. If you watch the show Smash, you probably already know this, but when a show is being prepared for Broadway, it doesn't just open on Broadway. They do previews of it, and those previews are used to see what works and what doesn't work in front of an audience. It's basically like test screenings in Hollywood, right?
I mean, we've talked about this before because infamously, Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark was in previews for, 3 years?
Yes.
Selling tickets that entire time. It's basically like beta.
It's early access. It's Steam early access.
Yeah.
But yeah, so a lot of these...
Sometimes the show is very broken. Yeah,
or sometimes the show that you see in the previews is not going to be the same show that eventually comes to Broadway. And those people who got to experience it the first time, and you know what? I was going to be rude to those people. I was going to, chastise those people for not being able to handle the changes that may have come. And then I think about the week that I had Bloodstained Ritual of the Night early, and the fact that I just can't play that game anymore because of how different it was a week later. How much they affected it in a week. So, I mean, if I had been able to fall on something and feel semi-betrayed by the portrayal a week later, imagine these people who saw a preview of Jagged Little Pill, I'm guessing in 2019, right? I don't think that there were previews in 2020. I mean, I know that there were 2 months where stuff could have happened.
Yeah. It would have been late 2019, early 2020, as I believe, when a lot of these shows really landed.
Yeah.
It was just early enough, and then February to March of that year of 2020 is when, we really started to lock stuff down. And New York, I believe, was one of the earliest ones, so it would have been probably February. But maybe it kind of gives you a little bit of an appreciation for this idea of early release, because I was going to be like, oh, theater's different than video games, though, because of all the work that goes into it, and I realized what an asshole that sounded like.
Good, look at that. We both had egg on our face, right? You can call us the egg-faced twins. Don't call us that. That just sounds like it has negative connotations.
Yeah, but when we think about that final product that's in front of us, we often don't think about everything that goes into it when we make those kinds of comments and things like that. And so, the idea that something gets workshopped, the idea that something changes, the idea that something grows is one of the best parts of art in the modern era, right? It is a huge part of modernist and then eventually postmodernist movements of art that it is not stagnant. Anything that is stagnant doesn't really fall into those categories. So anything from the last 40, 50 years probably has a little piece of that evolution, that growth in it. And so the thing is, for me, is that anybody out there that takes umbrage with the fact that the show that eventually won this award was not the show that they saw years previously, you're missing kind of part of the point. Now, to say that it's not your bag, that's fine. But to crap all over it, that's a different conversation.
Yeah.
And that's just a problem with criticism in general.
I don't disagree. And there's going to be some criticism for other things after we finish our Tony talk. Ironically, it's going to be more Tony talk, but that's just a fun little teaser for what's to come
The
in the
Tony
episode.
report. Yeah.
I wish that this were one of those. Maybe it is. I don't know. Math. But yeah, it's one of those situations where this is what we're living with. This is where we are right now. And I don't know. It just, the amount of people talking about this show and how it's not what we saw before and the version now betrays it, and then the people coming in and saying, well, it only won because it had the monetary backing in order to mount a campaign. And then, like, the final thing of it all is that, like, do these Tonys even count? And that's wrong, but, like, it's not the same as a usual Tony season, right?
No, this Tony's going to carry a black mark with it for the rest of its time.
It's got the asterisk. It's Roger Maris's 61st home run. I just...
Every time somebody talks about these particular shows, any show this year winning a Tony in the future, they're going to have to mention that it was in the middle of all of this, because it's not fair to the history of Broadway or to the shows themselves this year. Like, it needs to be acknowledged for their own sake that this is what was going on, because the flip side of this coin is these are the shows that were able to do something, like there's something beautiful to the idea that, like, these are the shows that were able to break through before the world went to shit. And we need to remember that, right? Like, this is what the world was, literally the moment before everything changed in 2019, 2020. So, like, it's not just a disparaging comment to say, well, those were the weird ones. It's important to remember the fact that is what was going on when this art was created, because we talk about this all the time. The moment influences the art. So, like, to ignore that aspect of it is not fair to the shows themselves either.
Yeah. I don't know. In the future, I would like to be reminded of when the Tonys are happening, and I'd like to take the day after them off so I can just hide away.
Fair enough.
And I know that might sound like something. It's just I've grown to.
Part of it is, for me, is I don't surround myself much with the theater people anymore. So, like, yeah, I still have connections to our friends and stuff from back when we were in school, but I've been so far removed from that world for so long that I don't experience this, right? So all I've heard is people laughing about the fact that, like, they tried to do the Tonys this year just as, like, a concept, not because of any particular show that was involved, but the idea that there was just something that they did. And I'll be honest, when somebody said the Tonys happened, I was just like, oh, right. Wait, what? Like, there was all of that, like feeling wrapped up in it. So, like, that's where me and my people are at.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's one of those things where it's the day where I'm not hyper active on social media. I kind of just have it, and it's a nice way to be able to reach out and connect with somebody from my past. Though, honestly, that whole thing is shifting. More often than not, I'm on my phone, I see or read something, and then I say, all right, that's enough internet today. and then I move away. And eventually, I'm going to feel like it's enough forever and get rid of it. But it's also this weird, like, part of the world, especially now, especially in the pandemic, like, social media was kind of the only way that we could communicate with people. And what the Tonys showed me is that a lot of these people that I still follow and am friends with on Facebook are from a world and part of something that I'm no longer connected to the way that I was when we became friends.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I'd rather just take that one day, because a lot of the times it's like, it's fun to see people's W's. It's nice to see where they're winning, right?
Mm-hmm.
And really, like, after an award show, it is just people complaining about kind of their losses, in a way, because what they wanted to win didn't win, or if what they did win, they're complaining about other losses as well. It's in the wake of an award show, social media is so negative that it's not really worth it anymore.
Yeah, I know. Man, I do want to say, like, love that the Tonys have come around to Wayne Brady being involved. It's about time you smartened up.
I mean, I love that the Tonys are on TV. I like that. Remember, like, I remember the first time they showed him on TBS, and that was like big deal. Like, the Tonys are going to be televised, and now the Tonys, as they should be, considering it's an EGOT, right?
Yeah.
Your Emmy, your Grammy, your Oscar, and your Tony, that it's on major network television, and the network that covers all of them, right? Good for CBS for having almost every award show every year.
Oh boy. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, like, this is the other reason we don't talk about the Tonys, people, is it just kind of takes the fun out of the room.
Yeah, it does. Sorry. So yeah, and that's it. But it would feel weird to not acknowledge them. A, because of the nature of them, but B, because our collegiate experience was able to yield a Tony winner,
Yeah.
asterisk or not. So like, we can no longer blame that, Sujan. I think we have to train that high-powered sense of perception on ourselves, Dr. Lecter.
Yeah. And like
I guess neither one of us are actors, right? You were a director and I did technical theater. So
yeah.
yeah, when a director from our program or someone who does like design and tech wins a Tony, then we can have the existential crisis.
Well, that's the weird thing is we have definitely been to school with people who have been on creative teams that went on to win Tonys, and the thing is I think what happened is they were never quite there at the moment the award had been won,
right?
Because we know plenty of people that have gone to work on shows that have done phenomenal work. So like this is a great sense of validation for any collegiate theater department in the country. Like I don't want to take that away at all, but anybody that was there before or since that is like, oh, I wasn't in that group. Like, no, you might not have been, but don't worry. That doesn't mean that there were not amazing creatives in those groups, guys. Like I have never felt that there was a lack of talent in our in our groupings. You know, not that everybody was on equal standing, but that like, you know, I don't know. It's a weird thing because I to be like, oh, there's somebody in your group won an award, so obviously that validates everything. And it's like, here I am 10 years later after all the work that I've done since then and been like, I didn't realize that we were waiting for validation.
Right, exactly. I've gone on, right? My work was validated when I got my job with Carnival Cruise Lines, and then, unfortunately, I learned something about myself. I want another mountain to climb. I want another challenge to conquer. I'm not gonna just rest on my laurels. Like, well, I got here, and now this is my life for the next 50 years.
Yeah,
I had to move on.
Yeah, I will say this about this year's Tonys is it felt like it was a very good kind of ending is not the right word, but like this arc of Broadway has definitely ended, and you can see that they're like kind of revamping, right? Like we're kind of like redoing Broadway because like this year half of the shows that are going to be on Broadway are going to be things, at least for the first few weeks, going to be things that already existed. They're bringing Waitress back. They're bringing back the Bob Dylan story, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's the name of that one? I can't remember the name of the
I'm not
Dylan
there.
one. But yeah, is that it?
I'm not here. That's the movie.
That's
I only imagine that's
no, but like so like there's a whole bunch of stuff that they're going out of their way to. I believe they're gonna redo To Kill a Mockingbird, Sorkin's from a couple of years ago, that Daniels would just like blew up the world in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so like they're like making it a point to be like, okay, we're hitting the reset button on everything. So to have admitted that, and we've known that all year that was been the plan, and then for them to still try and shove a Tony's in at the last second, like could have felt really kind of cheap, right? But by turning it into a Broadway's back celebration and kind of making it like a goodbye hello situation, they did good in that terms, and I want to acknowledge that.
Yeah, I can support that. It's an epilogue in a way, and it's sort of an overture as to what is coming. I fucking hate myself.
Hey.
For being able to use those fun vocab words there. But it was, I think the weirdest part about it, and then we can move on to, I have a lot of things that I want to talk about, is I went to sleep on Sunday not thinking that award show was going to happen, and then it almost felt like I woke up in an alternate universe. Where like, oh, what? People got awards? Someone who went, what is happening? And
Well, it's
then,
weird, right? Because
yeah,
you feel like you've missed out on some huge cultural thing until you talk to a couple of people and realize no, nobody paid attention to this particular one. It's the same way I felt about the Oscars and the Emmys the last couple of years. I feel I hear more people talk about the MTV Movie Awards nowadays than anything else.
I mean, it's really just the best pictures for the Oscars, but I haven't watched the Oscars since 2018.
hmm
That was the last year that I watched, and that's not even true. It's 2017 is the last one that I watched. 2018 is the last one I planned a menu for, but then something else that interests me was happening that same night, and I'm like, I'm gonna do this instead. If
Yeah.
that's, I'm gonna do that if that's all right. And I'm glad that I did. It was the better thing to do overall in terms of life. Last question, and then we can transition. So the EGOT, I brought up the EGOT. That Emmy, right? Do you think the daytime Emmy counts?
Yes.
Okay, I'm glad. I think that if you win an Emmy, you have the E fulfilled. But I did stumble upon a debate when the daytime Emmys were happening about the fact that I don't know if a daytime Emmy counts as part of the EGOT, and I'm like,
I'm sorry.
what
Somebody
else
that does the
would
work
it
to get
be?
a Grammy, an Oscar, and a Tony, and then they just happen to pull off an Emmy that is maybe not the same kind of entertainment you normally can. You don't get to say that. That's like saying like somebody who won a Grammy for country music, it doesn't count. Like, no, they still won a Grammy, guys. Just because it wasn't your genre of consumption doesn't make it not valid.
Right, exactly. If you win a spoken word Grammy, it's still a Grammy. You still got a Grammy. I don't know. I'm glad. I just wanted to make sure that we were on the same page about that one. Because I read that and I'm like, what a stupid thing to ask. That sounds like sour grapes. Guy who's calling out the daytime Emmys.
Yeah, like somehow getting a daytime Emmy is easier than getting an Emmy in general. That's a
Yeah.
weird line to draw.
Yeah. I don't know. Good. Excellent. Let's shift. So we're recording on Sunday. We're going to be recording on Sundays for a while, which is why we're not talking about the Patriots-Buccaneers game. But the Patriots-Buccaneers game is happening tonight.
You mean the Patriots versus the Patriots Part 2?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mean the Empire Strikes Back?
Yeah.
I don't. It's so crazy. I don't know what I want. What outcome do you want to have happen in this game? Who do you want to win?
I want the Pats to win. I mean, the conversation around specifically Brady, like it's. I know that Gronk and who else is over there? Brown, is it? Who?
Yep, that's correct.
Yeah, like they all got picked up by the Bucks, and everybody's joking that the Bucks starting lineup is essentially the Pats from 5 years ago, right? And I think the weirder thing for me is, and this always happens in sports and movies, everything, is that when we got rid of Brady, plain and simple, when we cut ties with Tom Brady, there was a large conversation about how yes, part of it is he was getting older and his play was eventually going to fade away, but that was not the real reason we were getting rid of him. It had been years of problematic shit with him between deflated balls and shitty attitudes and all sorts of stuff. I mean, like there was a cultural reason why it was also time for the Patriots to get rid of Brady. The conversation this season has just been like, the Pats have to be kicking themselves. They kept saying Brady was too old to play, and I'm like, I don't remember that being the hill that we went to war on, right? Like we weren't getting rid of Brady because we thought like this is it, he's never going to win again. In fact, the exact conversation was, despite the fact that we know that he still has years worth of good game left in him, we feel now is the time that we need to walk away from this relationship. Like, and I'm putting it much more mildly than the actual phrasing that had been out there by a lot of fans and a lot of sportscasters and stuff like that. But like essentially, that was not the reason we stopped. And so everybody's acting like the game today is going to be some huge like comeuppance for the Patriots because we got rid of all of these guys. And it's like, that's not what happened with any of these guys. Like every single one of them left either on their own terms because they felt it was time for them to try and grow. And that just happens. And there was no harm, no foul. I'm talking about Gronk, right?
Whereas Gronk retired. Gronk came out of retirement.
But that's what I mean. Is like Gronk walked away, and we loved, it was a good send off. He was not leaving because of any problems with the team. He was not leaving because of any problems with his ability to play. Like it was just a good old fashioned breakup that we all agreed on. and he came back to play. He came back to play. And then the same, and then the other side of that is somebody like a Tom Brady, where we cut ties with him again, not because of his inability to play, but because it was just time to move on. And I don't know. I mean, like I feel like now I'm part of the problem because I'm being much more level-headed about it than anybody has ever been in some of these situations. But like, it's just weird to me for the way that the story has seemed to shifted in order to specifically make the Patriots the bad guys here. And what's weird to me, even weirder to me about that, is for a long time, the reason the Patriots were the bad guys were guys like Brady, who had been caught doing, terrible things. And people were just like, oh, yeah, worship at the altar of this asshole. And so here we are, finally not. And people still are making the Patriots the bad guys. It's just like, this is a really weird place to be in. Because basically, it'd be like Harry Potter fighting Voldemort and the Death Eaters for years, Voldemort changing sides, and then everybody being like, yeah, the Death Eaters are still the bad guys. And it's like, yeah, you're not wrong, but you've got like one of the worst over there, right? You recognize that, right? It's like
that hyperbolic analogy
really
there, my friend.
Not sports reference. I went as far away from football as I could, and I landed on Harry Potter. That's what happened.
That is, I believe that's the South Pole to sports is Harry Potter. Sports being the North Pole.
But it's crying in the background. It's fine. It's okay, guys.
I think so. The best part for me is you're not in Pat's Nation. You're not surrounded by Patriots fans. So you have just brought what was that?
Quite the opposite. Yeah.
Yeah. So you bring to the table a very interesting perspective from the people that you're hearing talk about it, who like the Pats are finally going to get their comeuppance with this Tom Brady, because here where I live, the discussion is more related to Tom Brady's going to get that comeuppance that like you should have never left, right? Yeah. Like we never needed you. We Bill Belichick is the reason why you won 6 Super Bowls, Tommy.
Careful with that one though, too, because that's like.
Oh no! I'm just saying. I'm just saying what people are saying.
Out a match, yeah, it's like. No, I understand that's not you saying it. I'm just anybody out there that thinks that they're pulling out the winning hand there needs to reevaluate the game they're playing.
Yeah, it's just been fun. Like this whole thing should be fun. I believe I would really like to see personally. I'd like to see the Patriots win, mostly because in that discussion of Belichick versus Brady, I think it would humble Brady in a way that he kind of needs. If he's going to continue to play until he's 50, like he said so many times, like because.
But the thing is 2 things to that. First of all, like he's had humbling moments before and it's clearly not worked. So like I don't like that's not going to happen. And the other side of that is like it's not like Belichick couldn't also use that kind of moment, right? But that being said, Belichick's not a human being, so I don't think there's any humbling this creature.
Exactly. You can't humble Emperor Palpatine. You can try, but in the end, Snoke. Yeah, it's just I don't know. I'm probably gonna watch the game, and I look forward to discussing whatever happens in said game. It's been very interesting the fervor around it. The fact that the lowest price ticket for this game is $1,100 is insane to me. Like this is the type of like history making football, and I think at the end of the day it's probably not going to be that great a game because as much as people want it to be Belichick versus Brady, Belichick doesn't have the team that he had when he had Brady. And that's nothing against Mac Jones. I think that Mac Jones is going to be a great quarterback eventually. We just haven't seen them have that great a season so far.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, it reminds me of those times back in like the 2000s, the early 2000s, when wrestling was really at its peak in popularity, and you had people that didn't understand the kayfabe of the whole thing, right? Like they did not understand that there was a showy aspect to the ways in which guys would go up against each other, or it happens. It's always happened in boxing, right? Like the ways in which guys, and we see it now in the UFC and MMA fights, where like there's these quote unquote rivalries that are there that kind of, they make the event more fun, but people don't understand that, like, at the end of the day, those guys will go out and have a beer after this game and both celebrate the fact that, well, one of them made 10 million, the other made 20 million. So it's like, right, like there seems to be a lack of acknowledgement in that, in these particular conversations. And I will say that things like wrestling have actually come around to the fact where so many people embrace that part of it, that it's celebrated and talked about openly now. And I love that. And it's part of the reason why I got into wrestling more in the last 5 years than I ever did before that, right? Back when kids were jumping off of deck chairs on top of each other when we were like 10 and 15, like I never got into it then. But now I'm much more appreciative of watching these guys talk about how, like, yeah, I've been in the business for 20 years. I think now I want to be a heel for a bit. So I talked to Vince, and we're going to do this story and see if it works. And if it doesn't, I'll go into retirement for a month, and then I'll come back and be the comeback kid, and everybody will love me for that. And I'm like, yeah, we're just going to admit that that's what the next year is going to be for your storyline. Sure. Okay. Let's talk about that. like I love, like, that is amazing. So, like, if everybody could just take a chill pill for 2 seconds and realize that, like, that what this game actually embodies is the silliness of the rivalry. Because, like, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, the same guys that are sitting here today being like, I wish Tom Brady would get his comeuppance, are the same people that are just like, Tom Brady's going to teach you all a lesson. And so, like, the fact that has altered and changed is fun. But man, the number of people that want to like goad me about it and talk to me about it and try and get a rise out of me, and I'm just like, yeah, it's gonna be cool. And it seems to upset them that I'm not, like, ready to throw blows with them. It's just like, I'm sorry, is that what we're supposed to do about this? And I don't know. I mean, like, I don't want to sit here and be like above it all. Like, I love getting into the fervor. I love getting into the story, to the concept of all of this stuff. But I think that I'm just getting, after years of people being at each other's throats for stupid reasons, I think my need for that kind of release has subsided a bit.
Oh, I mean, especially since now people are at each other's throats for, like, real reasons that will actually have an effect on us after the game is over.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to get that cathartic release from, like, a fun little rivalry, because, right. Yeah, I don't know. It's going to be interesting, and I think it's funny that, like, we're releasing this episode before it happens, so we don't know what happens. And do you want to? I'll take the Bucks. You can have the Pats, and one of us will be king of the show next week for whoever wins.
Yeah, there we go.
So then we have some shit in the game too, and yeah, you can then mock us or celebrate us on the internet too. So that's the thing. But it's something that has to be acknowledged, because it's been everything. It's been so big, like, media-wise, that yesterday, it was Adele's Hello from the Other Side. Mm-hmm. It was a promo, and it looked like a theatrical shot promo. And it was Tom Brady playing with the Bucks, and then when it came to Hello from the Other Side, like, the lighting cast over him in a shadow, and then suddenly he was dressed as a Buccaneer. Like, in his Buccaneer uniform. He wasn't dressed as a pirate.
He wasn't just damn it.
Right? And Dale just stopped dead, threw her hands up and said, "This is all just reality fucking television. None of this matters. That it's fixed, it's fake. Oh my God." And it's like, yep, you're not wrong. Welcome to
breaking.
What was that?
The Matrix, it's falling apart before my very eyes.
But yeah, so that's it. So just reiterate before we move to the next topic. Siegen has the Pats, I have the Bucks. One of us is king of the show next week because of that. And if you're listening, well, no, the game will be played by the time we release this, so you can't even put your bets on it. Yeah, that's that. So I've had a lot of wins this morning, right? Coming into recording the show. It has been just a victory-filled Sunday. And I want to share that. I want to get back to that positivity before we talk about the next topic.
Okay.
I found the new Voodoo flavor for Mountain Dew, the 2021 Voodoo. Have you seen it yet? Have you had the chance to indulge?
I have not had the chance to indulge, nor have I seen it in the wild yet.
Oh,
But
good.
I have heard pray tell of it, specifically because we've been talking about Mountain Dew flavors, because this is what we do when we're not on air, apparently.
Yeah, no, it's Mountain Dew. Well, I
It's
had
not
to
in the
get.
Baja family, right? It's
No, it's
not
not in
one
the
of the.
Baja family.
Okay.
And I don't think it could be in the Baja family. There's no lime flavor in it.
Okay.
So Voodoo is a mystery flavor. If you're not familiar with what Mountain Dew has been doing during the month of October for the last 3 years, I believe. I think it started in 2019.
Mhm.
And it's like ghost white. It's kind of an upsetting color white, but it also sort of triggers that nostalgia because it's the same white as the mystery flavor Airhead. So like
Right.
it's a convergence of white just means mystery. Which I've never really thought of the color white being attributed to mystery, but the marketers must know something that I don't.
No, I mean it's that idea that like you see something purple and you expect it to be like grape flavored, right?
Hmm.
Like, and I'm not saying that's true every time, but that is an association your brain makes. Green is usually like what, like apple, sour apple-ish maybe.
That's funny
Um,
because before green was lime, but they've
or
been
yeah,
working
yeah.
overtime for the last 10 years to rework our minds to have
Well, I
green mean
would
apple.
Well, and I would say that it's two different greens, right?
Yeah.
Like you look at a Baja Blast, and that's a very like that. There's a tropical greenness to it, right? And this is all these are all this is all bullshit, right? But this is exactly what marketers will sit around and talk about when they decide what they want to do. So the thing that white does in this conversation is there is no association to white.
Right.
When I say white, what is the flavor in your mouth? There isn't one, right? Whereas if I say like red, what's the flavor in your mouth? Some people might say cinnamon, some people might say strawberry, some people, but there is a flavor that comes along
There's
with
a
that
color
connotation.
flavor
Yeah,
association going on.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point. I never said. I guess I wish it were clear, right? Because if it were a clear Mountain Dew, then I don't know what it is. But I suppose clear flavor is lemon lime in sodas, right? Like that's why
Or you can get
Pepsi
into
Crystal
your
failed.
or you can get into your like birch beers or something. So it's gonna be either overly sweet or overly sour, but I can definitely see it going one of two ways, right?
Yeah. So yeah, you're right. That white color is sort of just blank canvas.
Hmm.
Oh yeah. If I had to guess, right, because the fun of Voodoo is to guess what the flavor is. I'd say it's wild berry. Last year it was like Skittles. It was like if you took all the Skittles and threw them in your mouth, you literally tasted the rainbow. This year it's sort of like the purple bag of Skittles, the wild berry Skittles. Because
Nice.
I'm like, oh, that's berry punch right there. Oh, and a little bit of strawberry. Oh, it's wild berry Skittles. That's the flavor. So I
I
guess they
want
would just call it
them.
wild berry.
Yeah, right. I want them to completely like go off the rails one year and make it just like buttered popcorn jelly bellies, right? Like the most like disgusting soda flavor. Everybody's just like the new flavor of voodoo's coming out. Let's guess what it is this year. And then it's just like one sip and everybody's just like, oh, what is they do?
The problem is, and it's strange, but I think the problem with doing something like that is where I don't really associate anything with it because the first one was candy corn, the second one was fruit medley, which is what I think they ended up calling it when it was Skittles, and now it's like a wild berry. If they did buttered popcorn, because the buttered popcorn jelly bean is white, it would secure a color taste association and it would defeat voodoo forever. So the very last voodoo, right? The series finale voodoo can be buttered popcorn, but they can't do it beforehand. Otherwise, nobody would ever do it again.
Oh man.
They'd end up tanking their sales. And that's just because this is what I do. This is what I think about. But I got to try that. Nova, the man called Nova, has a Marvel Legends figure that is an exclusive only at Walgreens. And I spent this morning going to 4 different Walgreens, and I found exactly one Nova figure. So
Nice.
that felt good. That's Dale's. That's all Dale's. Because I'm looking at Richard Rider Nova in his MCU outfit, which is ironic because he never really showed up in the MCU. But the costume is clearly influenced by what the Nova Corps looked like in Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting figure. And then the Sam, I can't think of his last name. She has a young Nova as well. So like, if anyone in this house is going to get the single Nova figure I was able to track down, it's going to be Dale. But it's always fun to find a exclusive figure at a Walgreens because you never know, right? Like the the four shops that I went to, right? The last one had no Marvel Legend figures at all. The first one had a Spider Knight figure, which was released in 2019. And that says to me, oh, they're not going to buy ordering any more Marvel Legends figures for this store because they don't sell.
Yeah, yeah.
The second one I went to had 11 Emma Frosts, which is a Walgreens exclusive from 2018. They had 11 of them, Siegen.
Well, what's weird to me is like, why Walgreens, right? Like, what is the contract that must have been put in place all of 5 years ago, 6 years ago that like allowed Walgreens of all places to be involved in these exclusives? Because like, I don't know. I don't think of the toy section at Walgreens as like the place to go and buy my collectibles. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like
that's what they wanted to do because Walgreens, unlike CVS, like we in the Northeast, right? CVS is the one that has the biggest foothold, but Walgreens has that foothold almost everywhere else. New York City, it's going to be Duane Reade. And I think it's just Duane Reade. I think all the Rite Aids got turned over into Duane Reade's. And all the Rite Aids here got turned into Walgreens.
Yeah.
So it's one of those weird things where, like, Walgreens is kind of everywhere. And because of that nature that they're sort of there, and they're kind of they're not as varied as, like, a Walmart or a Target, but they're sort of... I guess if I had to compare it to another shop, they're kind of in the same room as like Dollar General.
Yeah, okay.
I'm okay with that. I think that I'm all right with that, them being on the same level. And Dollar General, right, like people are going to go there, and then Walgreens is like, well, we want to make people come here still, and they're willing to make that exclusivity deal with Hasbro. Because the deal is really with Hasbro. If you're looking for like unique figures from the Hasbro company, they're all going to be at Walgreens.
Yeah. I guess what it is like somewhere along the line in history, we kind of lost that mid-tier market, right?
Right.
Like I think I've talked about this before, but when I used to work for CVS, I did for 3 years, and it was the two CVSs that I worked at in my time. They were the place where like people would come and do their weekly grocery shopping. Like, you know, not many people, but it was, you know, these little old ladies would come in with all of their CVS coupons and CVS bucks and stuff like that, and they would buy, you know, loaves of bread, peanut butter, jelly, a couple of frozen meals, things like that, milk. Like, so there was that aspect to it, and there was the seasonal section, and where we had costumes at Halloween, and there were definitely some people every year that was their place to go and buy their costumes. And I think what it is that even further back than when I was working there, it was more important for places like that to exist. There was not a grocery store every block, or in Rhode Island, sometimes one grocery store across the street, literally from another mega grocery store. And it's just like, which one do you prefer to go to today? Like that kind of thing didn't exist. And what's really weird is as I've moved further west in this country, it's become more and more like that, where there is not a grocery store everywhere. Food deserts are an actual concern in these areas, and that is something that I often have to like remind myself about and things like that. The fact that like there are certain products that I just can't get out here because they don't bother shipping them out here because nobody out here eats well, you know, like that sort of thing. And so the need for a mid-level market like a convenience store, but not, right? Like it's something more than a convenience store, because we also have those out here. And I guess that's what I need to think about here when I think about the idea of like a toy section that might have like exclusive collectibles in it and stuff like that being in these kinds of places, is that like for some people, these are the only places where they can go and buy these kinds of toys. And that's more true than ever now that we don't have things like a Toys R Us or a KB Toys anymore, right? Or, you know,
yeah.
I guess that's what specifically in the toy market. I guess that's what GameStop is hoping over the next few years they can really kind of slot into. We'll see if that works.
Right. And they have exclusive deals too. And it's that same sort of thing where like we can drive people to come in, and it worked for me, right? Like the reason why I go to Walgreens is I went to Walgreens that first time, however many years ago, in the first year of the Say Report, right? I went into Walgreens and I was able to get a Silver Surfer action figure. And there was no other way to get a Silver Surfer action figure. So now, if I'm like looking for something, I'm like, well, I'll stop by Walgreens too, right? Because whoever knows what exclusive they might have right now. And if they don't have the exclusive, usually, I mean, like this whole thing that's going on with the shipping holdups on the ocean, and Christmas might be ruined, which like is such clickbait like nonsense. The way that they're saying that, I feel like we're living in a Christmas special right now.
The year without a Santa Claus really comes to mind.
Because oh my god, all these shipping boats are just out there with nowhere to like come in and unload their cargo. Which, isn't that just strange, right? Because there was the whole Suez Canal snafu where that boat got stuck and that stopped shipping. And now there's an overabundance of boats with product and nowhere to put the product. Like, I don't get it. I don't understand how those two things can exist within 6 months of each other.
Yeah. Well, what's going to happen is that suddenly, just before Black Friday, all those ships are going to be able to come to port and drop off all of their stuff, and there's going to be a glut of stuff available just in time for holiday sales and shopping and all that. So don't you worry.
Yeah, well, thank you, Siege. I can't wait.
I hope I'm right, right?
Yeah.
I hope that this is not some large issue that we're going to have to deal with now for the next so often. Like, I would rather this just be a capitalist tactic at this point, just to make me buy more crap.
Right, it would feel... I mean, at least you're aware of it, right? If you're aware that, like, that's what's going on, then you can, like, maybe avoid getting pulled down into the scuffle of it all.
Well, and it means that the world's not losing its shit in some way, right? Like, if that happens, well, then that just makes sense. Yeah. And, boy, I really wish something over the last 2 years would just make sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, gee, sorry, it got real somber. But no, like my mother, she had seen that she went to a Walgreens and she found the new Lego blind bags. So then she's like, I'm going to check the one by us to see if they have them as well. And like it shook her how empty the store was in terms of just like product. And I'm like, are you okay? She's like, no, I'm really not. Like I didn't think that it was that bad because she hasn't been going out. We've mostly been doing Instacart for everything. So it was like kind of one of her first times in a store.
Yeah.
And like the first one wasn't like that, but then the second one being like that, like you just realize the disparity and how it affects different areas. It hit her hard. And like, that's when I started to look into it and try and figure it out. So I don't know, but you're not wrong about these like low tier things, because I've seen people who go on hunts. Like that's a whole thing on YouTube. It's people who go toy hunting, and they're like, "Yeah, I'm at this Walgreens," and it's like because for 45 it's 45 minutes to a Walmart or a Target. So like that Walgreens is the place where people go for stuff.
Right.
And then they're like, "Look, it's all restocked with new things," and it's like, well, that doesn't happen here, but that's because people in this area, they don't go to Walgreens for toys.
Right.
And that one that had the 11 Emma Frosts, I've been going there pretty much standard throughout the pandemic. It's right by Bonnet Shores, so I get to like stop by the beach early morning, and then right as they open, I get to go in and like feel like a human being again. Because you don't feel like human or normal if you're not doing the things you used to do. Yeah, so like that's one of the ways that I've like sort of maintained a balance. And I've been picking up G.I. Joe figures every time that I'm there. And because they never have G.I. Joe figures, they continually get new waves of G.I. Joe figures. So like and that's the fact. And it's not going to happen anymore because I went there today and I'm like, oh, I have all of these figures. And I'm like, oh, and they ordered them because I bought all of these figures one at a time each time I visited. Because I didn't want to like buy all of them, right? You're supposed to leave one for the next collector. But then, like, when I go back a week later and the two things that I just looked at are still there, I'm like, well, I guess I'll pick up one of these, right? I'm still leaving one behind. And then they'll buy more because they're selling. And it's one of the only Walgreens that has G.I. Joes. And I
Hmm.
feel like it's because of me going in on Sundays and buying a single
Yeah.
figure. And actually, I had a discussion with the woman who worked there today about. She's like, I've seen you in here buying these. Do you like collect them? And the first thought is like, no, I don't. I just like to buy them and burn them.
It's my ritual. It's how I keep my heart
It's how
going.
Sunday goes, right? I just want to
Yep.
make sure kids don't get to enjoy toys. Really, that's what keeps me going. No, but it was a really nice conversation, and it really helped, like having an almost personal connection with another human being.
Yeah.
Like, ooh, it felt pretty good. It was another W, and that's the place that had the voodoo, so that was excellent. And then I found Nova at the third store I went to, but they had nothing else. They had a basketball. They had a basketball on the shelf, and I'm like, I guess basketball in the toy department makes sense. Walgreens, I'm so sorry for your loss. And that's it. And then also the other thing that the big stores are doing, like your WalMarts and your Targets, they're doing event sales on toys now,
Yeah.
which I don't know how to feel about that. I don't like it. I'll just be honest. It's not something that I enjoy. The fact that they're like, every Friday in September, we're going to announce a new limited exclusive collectible available from Target. And it's like, oh, okay. And it draws people into the store to shop, and hopefully they buy other things. But then those things become difficult to find. And also, with just what the collector's market is doing right now, and that's not something for like a small bit of conversation that we're having in the middle of the episode. That's something that we should probably talk about, like soup to nuts one time. The
Yeah.
fact that the collector market is being so inflated. And we can talk about how the housing market is being inflated too. Everything is being inflated with false value right now. And as a result of that, Target is seeing a real big issue with people going in, buying all the stuff that they have exclusives of, and then they go online and they sell for like 4 times the cost. To the
Hmm.
fact that now Target, and let's talk about it. If you get a job working at Target and you're in like the toy department, you don't think that part of your job is going to have to be policing and making sure that only one item goes to a person, right? Like that's not why you get the job at Target. The people
Yeah.
in the
I mean, there's a
clothing
lot of
department aren't like, oh, you can only buy one green shirt. We want to make sure everybody gets a green shirt.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into just like suddenly you find yourself as like an arbiter of fun, and
Yeah,
like that is just like the weirdest position to find yourself in because it's not fair. I mean, like it's just not fair to the retail worker getting probably paid minimum wage, which we all know is not enough to do jack shit with nowadays, to like also be the guy that has to stop the asshole that comes in with a plastic bag and just shoves every Funko Pop it can get its hands on into that bag and then runs out the door, right? Like that's it's weird, you know? And like the reason that you don't like those like flash sale things that like or the weekly like release stuff is because it's early signs of predatory behavior for collectors that we've talked about before.
mm-hmm.
And it's made all the worse that like as we've mentioned before, this is an industry that where one of your biggest markets, if not your biggest market, is children. And so like in addition to the fact that like you're doing something that could be easily exploited for the people out there that have the throwaway money, but you still shouldn't exploit them. Also, part of this is that you're also going after people that are not in a position to be making rational decisions with money that they maybe should not be spending on every week on a action figure when maybe they should be learning the value of like saving up for the one thing that the one special thing that they want and all that. It's wild that they're picking up on these kinds of tactics that are kind of what ruined the smaller like mom and pop shops. Like those exact tactics are what kind of made people give up on going to those kinds of places eventually. So like there it clearly is a sign that they just want their money now while the toy market is hot. And and in a year if it's not, it's not.
Right. It's yeah, it's
They can
just
survive that.
it's
Mom and
they'll
pop
they'll
shops
be
could.
fine. Other people can't. It's disappointing. It's just sad. I don't know. You're not wrong about the predatory nature of it, and I mean the other sad point of it is the fact that it's our generation, right? It's the millennial generation, and we grew up being sold Transformers and Ghostbusters and all of these things that are currently on the shelves right now. And the
Yeah,
reason that they're selling the real Ghostbusters toys again is not for the kids. It is for the adults who now have that disposable income and want to feel like a kid again.
for sure. Yeah, but then the ugly like side of this is that they're not making an exclusive section in Walmart for the adult toys, which is
Well, they actually do have that in the electronics department. Both Target and Walmart now have exclusive adult collector sections. They were
yes,
able to
but
avoid the adult toy of it all. Um,
the idea being that like it's not a section that kids don't go
don't
by.
Yeah, kids are also going to
Like
want to go and buy it. It's
like
not.
the kid and they're going to be in the electronics section and what's even worse about that is mom and dad are going to drag them out of the toy section saying no, not today, we're not getting a toy, we have to go over and buy, you know, a new cell phone for your grandmother, a new TV, because like that's what we've all been saving up for as a family. And then what have they done? They've just dumped them in another toy section.
Yeah.
Like it's the illusion that they have done something good by pulling it out of the toy section, but they're not making it exclusive to just adults to go in and view these things. So like at the end of the day, they're still banking on the person walking by that shelf and saying, "Ooh, I want that," and they know damn well that that's more likely to happen with a kid, like 8 to 13, than it is with an older adult that is there because they've been planning to do something budgeting with their money, right?
Right.
Like, yes, they are depending on the disposable income of adults now who don't have that kind of impulse control, but they didn't give up on the lack of impulse control of children. They're just adding to it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I certainly don't think that it's the only reason that those things exist in the electronics department is because your general, like, low level electronics employee already has a set of keys. So having it
Hmm.
be another thing that that person has to unlock, because it's
Yeah.
like the magnet peg things, so that that stuff can't go get stolen, 5 finger discounted like it does in the toys section. You kind of have that guard already in the electronics
And
department. It's
I don't
not
know what.
something magnanimous that they're doing at all.
No, yeah, and I don't know what the general setup is, but the other thing you got to think about is floor layout flow. Like this is a weird conversation for us to get into, but again, I ran this kind of shit at a
Mm-hmm.
CVS for years, so like I actually had to have conversations about this with people. But the idea being that in a lot of the Targets and in a lot of the electronic sections and stuff, sorry, Walmarts and stuff out here, the electronic section and the toy section are often either across the aisle from each other or literally right next to each other. So the aisles kind of evolve into an electronics section. So the idea of there being an adult collectible section that is the demarcator between one and the other, it's not used as a way to say like these are the toys that are meant for the older kids. Like no, instead what it is it's literally a way to drag you all the way over because you start looking at the toys and you keep looking at toys and now you're looking at more expensive toys and now suddenly you're looking at PlayStations and Xboxes, which some people are going to classify those as toys, but you are technically in the electronics section at this point. So it's like they haven't really like pulled them out of the toy section. Instead, what they've done is they've allowed the toy section to kind of like creep out into other sections to just to catch more people.
Yeah. And actually, it goes the other way, too, because talking about specifically Walmart and the fact that their games, like on release date, are $10 to $20 cheaper than if you go to like GameStop or even Target or Best Buy to purchase those games. Like that's a whole other kettle of fish if we're going to talk about it. But the only reason that they have the games cheaper is because while you're there, they're hoping that you'll see, oh, and they have collectibles. Oh my God, I had Ghostbusters as a kid. And then it might drag you into the toy section. It's all a gross symbiotic synergy that's
Yeah,
happening
especially
with
because
the
you
toy
just
market
saved.
right now.
Yeah, especially because you just saved $20 on that video game by coming here instead of going there. So that gives you $20 to burn.
Yeah.
That like in your head, you're just like, oh, I don't have to spend that. But you also it's in this like weird place in your head, this weird limbo in your head of just like it could be spent, but it doesn't have to be spent. But now I can spend it
Oh,
on
right.
something
Well, I
else.
saved $20 and a Funko Pop of Robinson Crusoe is only $8. So I'm
Right.
still technically saving $12.
Yep.
Meanwhile, Walmart's getting more of your money.
Uh-huh.
Like at the end of the day, their end game has happened for them.
Yeah. No, like I said before, like it's the same kind of tactics that have irked like the collectibles market since the collectibles markets like ever existed. This is not new. It's just the differences with these kinds of conversations now is that we know better and we're talking about toys. We're talking about video games. We're talking about the kinds of things that draw like children in.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets really gross really fast. Yeah.
Yeah, it's something. And then there's also a whole other level, but again, that's for an actual episode to like focus on the grading of collectibles and what
Yeah.
that means for the world.
Uh,
But
mhm.
now I'd like to take a time to talk about the Molisantes, the many saints of Newark. The
Yeah, yeah, we
yeah,
could definitely talk about the many saints of Newark. I have to say that, I did not grow up specifically in the Newark, New Jersey area, but I remember that a lot of the churches around there aren't really named after saints. I think that there's only like three out of like a dozen or so that are actually named after saints. Because like I remember a Saint Lucy's, and I think there's like a Saint John's or something somewhere.
there's a Saint
Um,
Ignatius. I
okay,
know that I've
okay,
seen that. So
all right. So yeah, so there's a few saints in Newark.
yeah. What we're talking about is the many saints of Newark, a Sopranos story.
I feel like mine would have been a much more fun conversation, but fine,
Yeah,
we can do
yours would
yours.
have been, but let me tell you, it would have been. It would have been a more fun conversation because the many saints of Newark, a Sopranos story, is the worst kind of prequel.
Oof.
It is for me, and I know that it's my opinion here, right up there with Rogue One. It,
Rogue One, the one, the yet another Star Wars movie that everybody shit on when it first came out, but now everybody's just like, oh, I'm gonna love this one now just because it's obstinate. Like, all right, relax.
yeah, no.
Um, but yeah, I'll be honest, man. I don't know anybody that's watched this movie besides you.
Well, I
For a thing that 10 years ago would have blown people's minds, right? Like the idea of doing a film in the Sopranos world, people would have lost their crap over. I cannot believe how much I have heard crickets on this movie besides you saying I think I'm going to give it a watch.
yeah, well, it's something that I've been looking forward to since it was announced, and I'm so thankful that when I'm like, so many saints of New, my mother was like, many saints of Newark, I want to watch it. When was it available? Can we watch it now? And I'm like, no, it's not coming until later in the year. And she's like, okay. And I'm like, it's a Sopranos prequel. Do you want to rewatch The Sopranos? Since you're all hyped up on watching Many Saints of Newark right now. And she's
Right.
like, no, I don't want to rewatch The Sopranos. I kind of want to go into this movie with fresh eyes. And then if I really like it, it can be our jumping off point to rewatching The Sopranos.
Yeah,
And I'm
yeah.
like, cool, I'm fine with that. And in fact, I agree with you. I think that that's a better way. But I wanted to make sure you had all of the facts, right? And I think for so long, this film was just called The Many Saints of Newark without the A Soprano Story subtitle.
Yeah.
That's what those are called. But it's not. But it's because not a subtitle in terms of the actual title of it. It's not like Rogue One, a Star Wars story. Like that's what that was called forever. And
Hmm.
and some things like that's the actual full title of that movie. Just like Solo, a Star Wars story. This one was not that for so long. Like it's like they wanted to have their cake and eat it too, and like, well, it's a Sopranos movie, but like we want to be able to sell it to people who didn't watch The Sopranos 10 years ago.
Well, and I think part of it was also, and maybe this is just projecting, but I would imagine that like a lot of people working on it, like they didn't want it to be riding the coattails of The Sopranos in a way that like you know what I mean? The closest thing that I can think of in recent memory is El Camino.
Hmm.
The
The Breaking
Breaking
Bad.
Bad movie that came out on Netflix, and mixed reviews, but generally pretty positive. A lot of people just really happy to see more of Jesse, like in any way, and things like that. Um, and I don't know where they ever fell on, like, do we just talk about this as just Breaking Bad the movie? Because like we don't want to. It's its own thing, but at the same time we'd be stupid not to, right? And so I remember there being a lot of people that were talking about like we wanted this to stand on its own, but we'd be dumb to not talk about the fact that this is a Breaking Bad movie, right? And so like there was a lot of really interesting conversation about that. And then to your point with this, just nobody seemed to be talking about the fact that there was a Sopranos movie coming because they were so adamant that they did not want this to be associated with the Sopranos up until like 2 months ago when suddenly everything that HBO Max was pushing on me was like the Sopranos story that you want that you've always asked for. Here's more Sopranos, and I was just like, oh okay, like
I
like
guess. I think a Wire movie would do better HBO Max, but that's just me. People won't shut up about The Wire. Uh, Nobody's talked about The Sopranos because you kind of biffed the ending.
well, and what's even weirder about that is like I feel like The Sopranos. There's plenty of shows that biff the ending that people still joke about, right? Like I still hear lost like conversations and things like that, and
We
maybe that's just
just
the world
did
that I
two
like to.
hours on Seinfeld, and if they
Right,
didn't biff
right.
that ending, nobody's
Yeah,
biffed an
I mean,
ending.
look at something like Friends. Like
Hmm.
that infamously at the end of that show just kind of rubbed people the wrong way. Or How I Met Your Mother and things like that. So that's the thing, right? Is like fucking up the ending of your show has proven time and time again that that doesn't have to be the reason people stop caring. I think one of the big things with The Sopranos is that like the the walls that it broke down, the edginess of that show no longer
It's no longer
cuts.
relevant.
I
It's
mean, like,
yeah.
I remember I was actually having this exact thought before we started recording today, as I was like, man, The Sopranos. Remember when, like, the big thing was how much swearing was on that show? Was that just, like around me when because, I was very young when The Sopranos really kind of got into its go. But, like, the idea being that, like, the F word being used once every 5 minutes was frequently brought up around me. Like, it was like a thing to, like, track, like, the swearing in that show and talk about how vulgar that show was and how edgy that then made it, right? And like and HBO in my memory, HBO kind of was like, yeah, that's because we're not TV, we're HBO. Like they kind of like went a little edgelord with that exact thing, right? And now like that is nothing. Like we get that kind of swearing on AMC shows.
I mean, it's really interesting because the other thing that they talked about is that it's not just adults who are swearing, because you have Meadow and AJ who are younger. Like at the beginning of that, it's like 13 and 16 are their ages, but they also swear, and that's a big thing of it too. And really, that's on the heels of something like South Park, where third graders were swearing, and that's
Right.
the same year because I got linked to the no Ocarina of Time, and we went away for vacation. And the hotel we were staying at had HBO and was showing the first season of The Sopranos. So as a family, we watched it on that vacation,
Yeah. See,
and and then we came home and we got HBO, and we've had HBO ever since.
Yeah, I
So
just like it's weird because like I remember a lot of the Sopranos success being built on the fact that it was just a step ahead of the game in terms of violence and language and that sort of
well,
stuff.
it's not
And
TV, it's
it
HBO. Comes from The Sopranos.
so this idea being that like it was never talked about as being good art, and I think there's actually conversations to be had. I mean, the idea of doing like a Goodfellas or a Godfather, but then with like the aspect of like ghosts, and I'm not saying actual ghosts, but like but he sees dead people around him all the time. Like his guilt is embodied
Is
by
manifested,
actually
yeah.
is actually manifested on screen, and like and him going to a therapist and dealing with therapy and like making the analyze this jokes all you want, but like the idea being that it is a man in that position, like studying a fault within himself, which is something really interesting because consistently in those stories, their downfall is the fact that they refuse to acknowledge their faults, and that is what makes Tony a much more interesting character to me than any other gangster character that's come out in the last 20 years. Is that like the ways in which he explores himself and deals with himself in really interesting and ways. Like weakness is on display for him, and that's really rare in those characters. And so like that's never been the conversation of The Sopranos. And The Sopranos was always this conversation about like weird structure and like and why did this have to happen because of the violence and the language being upsetting and then the ending, people being like like it's like the only conversation about it in terms of art I've ever heard. And the problem was that nobody had that conversation for 8 or 9 years. So when there was finally a thing that they couldn't avoid, they didn't know how to have it, and so everybody just decided they hated it. And like I don't know, like is the ending of The Sopranos really that bad? Did they really biff it? I mean, considering everything that show is about, the unknowing nature of that last moment kind of works for me,
dude. And it ends with "Don't stop," and it's just like, oh, now you get it's not over, right? We don't
right?
know what's going to happen to them. They're all just eating in this diner, and Journey's on the jukebox. And does their life go on? Like, do you want a definitive ending to these characters? Because the only definitive ending to a mobster gangster character you ever get is death, right?
Is death.
Like,
Yeah. Well, and so that's the other thing is so for so long everybody was just like, well, he clearly dies, and that just became like the thing that everybody kind of hung their hat on was just like, well, okay, so we know he dies, so the way they showed his death was not fair, and it's like, well, wait a minute, you've gone a step too far. Like we need to actually talk about the fact, like, do you think that that's actually what happens in that moment? Because like that's a read. It's a very easy read to be to be completely blunt about it. Like it's a very easy way because of what you just said. Because those stories always end in death. The kind of obvious ending to that show is, well, that's just him dying, and they didn't give it to us, and fuck them for not giving it to us. But what if the idea is that that may not be what happened? Like, let's talk about that. Like,
it's meant to inspire conversation one last time,
which it did,
and it
does
did for such a long time.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. So it's so weird because I haven't watched The Sopranos. I mean, since its first run, right? I watched, and really even then, I remember watching the first 3 seasons and it being like destination television. But then there was a delay going into the 4th season, and at that time I had gone to college, so like. And I was working too, so like I couldn't plan my life around Sunday nights. Yeah. And it really became like one of those first shows where if you didn't see it on Sunday, then it's going to be ruined for you anyway. Because everybody who's talking about it, like it was such a, really, the Sopranos was the experiment ground for what became the golden age of television.
Yeah.
Like they're the first ones who split up a season, right?
Yeah.
Because you have season 6, part 1, part 2. People hated that. And then like everything that did it afterwards, because Sopranos was the sin eater of that hatred, nobody really cared.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I think the thing for me, and this may be, you know, just people around me, or maybe like there is a slight difference in the millennialness that you experience versus me, but like the idea being that because it was experimenting with like resting its all of its advertising and all of its like success on the edginess and stuff like that, it had no sticking power. So people would talk about it, but it didn't matter because the next week's episode was going to come around and change the conversation completely. And it's like, it was kind of, I don't know, it just had this weird effect where like it kind of started to really push off like the idea that like maybe you can't just be edgy and be successful. Like there needs to be more going on, and I think that that's part of the reason it doesn't stick around as much. Maybe like it does all these things, it breaks all these barriers, but then it because of that it kind of eats itself into like as a show. Like it never quite gets to stand up ever again.
Yeah. I don't know. It's I mean, it's certainly my first experience with binging something because we sat and we watched 13 episodes of television as one of our days away that Christmas break. And like, don't think that we wasted it or that. Like, it was a blizzard. Like we had traveled to the mountains to do stuff, and then like the weather was so bad that we were stuck inside all day. But we watched as a family 13 hours of television. And like that's one of the reasons why I'm so hesitant with shows that I first experience in that way going forward to like a week to week with them, because maybe the show doesn't stand up week to week and I'm only going to be doing it a disservice. And now we've talked a lot about The Sopranos. We haven't talked about The Many Saints of Newark, which is called that.
But the important thing, right, is that
Yeah.
The Sopranos came out, hit really big, and then kind of simmered out over the last 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, people didn't like that ending, even though it's still discussed to this day, even if it's just that ending was awful, right? Mm-hmm. And then the people will sit around drinking beers for half an hour talking about why it was awful. And literally just that one scene. Nobody else talks about anything else that happens in that episode. They just talk about the fact that, yeah, don't stop believing. They ordered food. And he's happy with his son. And then fade to black. And it's like, yep, that's what happened. I don't know. But The Many Saints of Newark is called that because of Michael Imperioli's character, Christopher Molasanto, which is Italian for many saints. He is a ghost in a very Our Town-esque opening. We fly through a cemetery, and each of the headstones is talking and telling their story.
Yeah. Very, very third act of Our Town, actually. Yeah.
Have you seen it? Did you watch the movie?
No, I did not watch the movie.
Okay, I'm just making sure. Because you seem, very third act of Our Town. Just like, oh, okay, that's good job, guys. And then we find Chris Molasanto's grave, and the story that he's telling is about his father and how his father turned Tony Soprano into the man that killed him. And I'm like, wow, Chris, like, you don't have your own story to tell? You were married to Joey's sister in the show. Joey's sister from the show Joey, of course. Of course. And then this story happens, and it's meandering, it's thick. For the first hour, like the big draw of this, right? Even if you weren't there for the Sopranos of it all, right? Or you were just there for the mobster of it, the big thing is young Tony Soprano is being played by James Gandolfini's son, Michael Gandolfini. And that's like how they sold this movie to a section of people.
Yeah.
He is not in the movie for the first hour of this 2-hour movie. And then he's only in like 4 scenes when he does show up.
Yeah, well, I personally had gotten the impression that the idea was like, we're going to tell a story that's not about Tony. So hearing that he is actually as involved as this is actually wild.
Well, that's the thing, is that I felt like it's going to be a story before he's there, right? Like of the DeMeo crime family and everything that went into it that would like eventually lay the groundwork for Tony becoming it. And then these last 2 months, when there was the big push to get everybody to watch it, it turned into see the story of the man who made Tony Soprano.
Yeah.
So, like, that, to me, I'm like, oh, okay, so it's going to be Tony as a kid learning the game, right? Because you used the word made. No. It's about Chris's father, Dickie Molasanto, and the life that he lives. And Tony like looks up to him, but he's kind of mean to Tony most of the movie. Like, I don't understand, spoilers for The Many Saints of Newark, after his uncle dies in the second to last scene, why Tony makes a pinky swear with him at the funeral to like, I don't even know what the pinky swear is, like, get revenge for you, avenge your death. Like, it's never truly described. One of the things I've read about the movie, because there was one moment where Mike Gandolfini totally embodied his father in like voice, body language, everything. And then it comes to find out that he was doing that too much on the set for the director. The director's like, he's not that person yet. He's younger. So he wouldn't have that, like, you wouldn't be afraid of him. He wouldn't have that commanding presence. And it's like, so then why did you bother casting this guy?
Yeah.
Like, like another interesting thing of the story is the fact that, like, he was always sort of this big boisterous person. Even when he wasn't running the mafia, this is the charisma and the level of his anger that he had. And then he found a way to focus it into something.
Well, and you want to give me a story about Tony Soprano becoming Tony Soprano? Show me why he got to be this way. Like it's one of the funny enough, I'm just going to keep doing this. It's one of the biggest issues that I ever took with Star Wars Episode 1, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
this idea that we were going to see Anakin become Anakin Skywalker, and they show us that it's going to be a little kid at first, and it's like, okay, that's fine. Let's see the movie and see what happens with it. And then you see the movie, and the entire time he's just this sweet little like doughy-eyed cherub of a kid. Like he gets into goofy hijinks. I mean, he might as well be one of the Goonies. Like it's just the ways in which Anakin Skywalker is presented in Episode 1 becomes super problematic. And at the time, everybody said that is one of the biggest issues with this movie. Is like you're going to have a lot of groundwork to cover between him being this and becoming Darth Vader. And then like lo and behold, they couldn't quite do it. Like which is where you end up with a lot of the Hayden Christensen issues that people have, not with him himself, but with his version of Anakin Skywalker, just being like, we've made some huge leaps in character development and logic, friends. And then like now everybody's like, oh, but isn't that beautiful watching this kind of young child get destroyed? And it's like, at the time we all agreed that this was not the right thing to do, right? And like it feels like we're kind of entering that territory now, right? It's like here we are, like watching a director being like, "Oh, he wouldn't be that yet." Well, yeah, but then it has to make sense though, what he becomes, and we're not even talking about like a 10-year-old to a 40-something-year-old man at the beginning of The Sopranos. Like we are talking about what is like, for all intents and purposes, a man. What 15 years before
He's a junior in high school at the time where this whole thing is happening. So let's see, he starts there. He's about 17 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because he's at the time he's still hoping to be a varsity athlete and go on to play professional football. That's
Yeah.
still his goal.
Yeah.
But like, he steals an ice cream truck, and like, he's clearly the leader of that little gang of like thugs. And some of them are people that we go on to see in the show. And so like, that's interesting. But the Jake Lloyd of it all. Jake Lloyd was an excellent person to bring up. The person who played young Anakin Skywalker, pod racing and everything. The kid version, the like young version of Tony that we see for the first hour, I can see that kid becoming Tony Soprano better than the like teenage Tony Soprano becoming Tony Soprano.
Well, apparently because the damn director put a leash on him, which is the weirdest thing ever.
Because that kid, like, he looks up to his Uncle Dickie who runs numbers. So he starts running numbers in his elementary school.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, and that's cute and it's funny, but, like, you see that thing where, like, the kid's already kind of got the head for, you know, this type of business. So then when they're like, you can't do that, you need to focus on becoming an athlete, and that kind of stuff will get in the way of it. So the second hour of this movie, the Tony Soprano stuff, is all neutered and him trying to like behave and not get into trouble because he wants to play football. And it's like, well, this isn't interesting.
Well, I mean, in some ways, does it, like, does it make you re-examine the original show and say, like, maybe, there's been misreads on this? Because there was so much push into the violence and the edginess of everything. Tony becomes this character, much like a Scarface, right? Where, like, he is wrongfully idolized by a bunch of guys in colleges everywhere with posters up on the wall and T-shirts that they buy and stuff like that. That, like put Tony Soprano up on this pedestal as, like, this man that is, has defined himself and is running this business and by all accounts doing extremely well, blah blah blah. But if like this idea being that like, no, the entire time we were supposed to see him as this like broken man, which I honestly I think is the case, is I think there's a lot to be said about the ways in which The Sopranos was kind of one of those forefathers in the golden age of television, but also because of that really helped solidify a lot of the problematic ways in which audiences read those shows, a la that or a Breaking Bad or something, where the guy that they're examining, you're not supposed to be rooting for him, right? So is this just more of that, of just like this should be really reinforcing like what Tony could have been if the world had not done him dirty, right? Like I didn't watch it, as we talked about, so
Right.
obviously they didn't do it as well as they should have. But I wonder if that's really kind of more of what they wanted. They didn't want to idolize Tony. They didn't want to give him an excuse to be the man that he is later. And I don't know. I don't know.
He's more of a footnote than anything else to this story.
Yeah.
And the reason why is the film does two things right. Thing number one that this film does right? We're doing a reverse compliment sandwich. Here's the good part in the middle, and then I'm going to end with some more negativity. So just gear up for that, folks. It ends with the theme song of The Sopranos. And I thought that that was like the best part about it is I'm like, if this movie doesn't end with the theme song, it'll be a missed opportunity. Because, that theme song happens, that starts the show. And the movie ends, now it starts the show. The other really good thing, the other praise that I want to give this movie is casting Corey Stoll as Junior Soprano. Because, Corey Stoll's an amazing actor. He's fantastic. Everything I've ever seen him in, he has blown me away.
Yeah.
And the way that he is able to embody the man that's going to become the character of Junior Soprano it's otherworldly. Like, it's so good. And I just want to make sure that I'm giving the credit where it's due. The final credit is the fact that John Bernthal plays Johnny Soprano, Tony's father, and it does such a good job at being in the movie and not pulling focus for being in the movie. Like, it's what him and Corey Stoll do is this really good job of, like, we both have to exist and we continue to go on existing. We're not new characters, right?
Right.
One of the new characters is played by Ray Liotta, Hollywood Dickie Molisanto, and that's Dickie's father. And it is so distracting every time that Rick Liotta is on screen that that Ray Liotta is on screen that I'm happy he got killed at the 20-minute mark. And then I'm happy, like I groaned when it happened, but then I groaned because I'm like, oh no, they brought Ray Liotta back as his twin brother. But that character, Uncle Sally, was like really understated and not over the top. So it's like, oh, so Ray Liotta played this other guy completely big and bold because he was going to die and he wanted to make it memorable. Then also, so you get the like juxtaposition between the guy who's out there without consequence and his brother who has been in jail for murdering somebody when he was 18 years old.
Right.
So like, I want to like some good stuff happened, but Ray Liotta in the beginning, I'm like, you are ruining this movie, Ray Liotta. Why would you do that to me? I was so mad at Ray Liotta. Sorry. So that's it. Some of the casting is fantastic. Where it is a problem is very much they want there to be a sequel to this movie. This is half a movie. Just as the movie starts is when it ends. Tony makes that vow to his dead uncle and then got yourself a gun starts playing and I'm like, oh, credits? And now what, do you want there to be a sequel? And they do want there to be a sequel because you know who else is in this movie? Leslie Odom Jr. for literally no other reason than the fact that they could get Leslie Odom Jr. The storyline that features him kind of has no relationship to anything that ends up going on in the movie other than the fact that he used to work for Dickie and now and then at the end he's trying to establish his own family, but like that's it. Like it's just, oh, we kind of live in the same world with Leslie Odom Jr. But then there's a mid-credit scene with him and I'm like, so that's it, you're setting up for a sequel and this one wasn't even that good.
Yeah.
Like
the story just to get a beat on this whole thing, and this is going to be a major spoiler I'm about to ask you about. But this whole thing starts off with us like pulling up to a grave and us learning like this is the man who killed me. My father made the man who killed me. Do we then get to see him get killed?
No, because he died in the show. He died in the
Well,
last
but
season of the show.
right, but
Oh,
so
do we
but
get
that's
to?
what I mean is they don't like flash forward to like and then this is what happened, right? So they literally set up a story of I'm going to tell you this and you know from moment one that that it's going to have to be open ended on that particular aspect,
Mhm.
which means that they were definitely setting this up to possibly be a sequel or maybe even its own series. Imagine that if they were just like this is
This
the
is
many
a
saints of
backdoor
Newark the
pilot.
series. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's so weird. But the biggest thing, the thing that like this movie has stuck with me. This movie has stuck with me the wrong way for a movie to stick with me, where it has presented me with a question that I cannot find an answer for. And I hate that. I hate that so much. Because the other person who's in this film is Vera Farmiga. And Vera Farmiga plays Livia Soprano. And that's Tony's mother. Now, I
Hmm.
don't know how much you know about the original show, Sejin, but what I will say is in the first season, Tony's mother is a character. She's fucking crazy. Like, clearly not wanting to become his mother is part of the reason why Tony is like, I'm gonna go get help from a therapist
Yeah,
because I
yeah.
don't want to lose my mind. And even though Tony's a mama's boy, it never really feels like anything more than the fact that, like, he just cares about his mother because his father was in jail for part of his life growing up and all of that. So
Right.
he feels like a weird thing there. What they did, and the fact that they did it is one thing. The fact that also they're kind of celebrating and patting themselves on the back for the choice that they made with it is Vera Farmiga looks so goddamn much like Edie Falco or Camilla Soprano, the character she played, who is Tony's wife, that it is distracting. Because like it makes everything Oedipal and it never really felt Oedipal at all.
Yeah, it's weird. That's a weird choice. Again, maybe it's something that like if we went back and rewatched The Sopranos, maybe it
Maybe
would
you'd see it, but I don't. But I honestly feel like because the unfortunate thing is that the actress who played Livia Soprano, she passed away between the first and second season.
Mhm.
So much so that we want to talk about an experimentation ground of The Sopranos. A digital recreation of her was used in the first episode of season 2 in order to show her dying. And she just dies of like old age, like just sickness. So it's not like hyper exploitative of this woman who passed away, right? But it is one of those first times that this is somebody that passed away. We're going to use existing footage and overlay it in order to create new content with this person.
Oof. Yeah, man.
And it made me wonder, what it made me wonder is if that hadn't happened, if the real world actress hadn't passed away, would we have explored more of the Oedipal nature of this relationship? Because the people who made this are the original show creator and show
Right.
writer.
Yeah. So
So
so the
like,
idea of intention is a really interesting one. Um
but
yeah.
it's so
Uh,
distracting because she looks like Edie Falco. She sounds like Edie Falco to the fact that like I'm like, oh, there's Camilla. I'm like, no, that can't be Camilla. That's supposed to be his mom. And I'm like, well, his mom never looked like Carmela, never acted like Carmela. So like, what you all you're doing is distracting me and taking me out of it every time she's on screen. And it goes a step further. There's one scene, it's right before the end, where Tony calls his uncle to try to get some beer from him. And at this point, his uncle like doesn't want to have anything to do with him because the organization is beginning to crumble around him. So like he
mhm.
kind of wants to keep Tony out of it. And there's a young girl who is supposed to be Carmela, and she looks nothing like Carmela at all. Like to the point where like, oh, it's just some girl, and he's like, "Come on, Carmela, let's go." And that's the only acknowledgement that that's supposed to be his future wife. And then I think that's why the like celebration of like, oh, we did such a good job making Vera Farmiga look like Edie Falco. Like, make that girl look like Edie Falco.
Yeah, it's a
Let me
weird
look
it's
at her
a
and think that she's gonna grow up to be his wife.
Yeah, it's a weird choice because, like, one thing, when you're casting young actors that in prequels and all that stuff, like, oh, they don't quite look the same. Who cares? Like, like
Right.
it's acting. We can all get around that. But to then go out of your way and very specifically make a different character to look that way, suddenly you've given me a comparative, and that makes it a little bit of of an important deal that this character doesn't look right. Like, that's fucking wild.
Yeah, I don't know.
Like, part of me does have this weird kind of memory of his relationship with his mother being a weird one, but weird does not automatically like enter the realm of like incestuous, right? Like him being overly like attached to his mother is a is a is a definite noticeable fault in Tony, amongst many others, right? Is his issues with his family growing up, and not just his mom, but everybody in his
And his
family are
sisters, and yeah.
right. Are like that is definitely a huge part of him as a character and what makes him stand out from other men in that world, and it is explored in the show. But like to lean hard into a really weird like incestuous concept that was not necessarily clear in the old show, just it's a choice. That is a choice.
It's a choice, and it's also, they have this one scene where he's talking to a guidance counselor, and it really mirrors all of the times that he was with Dr. Melfi in the show.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, this is kind of cool, but also it defeats the whole line of, I've never done anything like this before. This is my first time.
Yeah.
That,
Well,
like, well, no, because you had a very similar thing with your guidance counselor right here. But then she talks to his mother, and she tells about a time while his father was away that she crawled into bed with him and read him a book. And honestly, like, in some way, it feels like the intention as I read it, based on what I know about the show, is that, like, that was the first time his mother showed him any real affection as a child.
right.
Because she read him a book. It's not like she just crawled into bed with him and slept with him through the night. Like, she did a motherly activity with him.
Right.
And then the therapist says, and that's one of his happiest moments. But then, like, when she looks like Edie Falco, it's like, well, now that's, like, weirdly incestuous and Oedipal. And, like, that's never something that I ever got as a read from your show. And, like, maybe you were gonna go there, but you never got there. And sort of to the show's credit, like, the fact that, like, he's not just a mobster, he's got a family and a mom and all this other stuff, that was interesting that first season. But then the show was able to grow, because there's really only so many jokes you can make about the mobster who has to go to his mother's for Sunday dinner.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and there's also there's the idea that I remember Sopranos being one of the first television shows that was talked about in the language of Shakespeare. The
Right.
idea being that it was like watching Shakespeare in a new era, and then it just so there's this piece of me that just wants to be like, if they were going to lean into this like incestuous stuff, that would be very like, it would fit that specific realm pretty well. But even then, it never. I don't remember it ever being there, and it's really, this is really making me question my original watching of The Sopranos, which to be fair, I have not gone back and rewatched since it
Yeah,
was like
like,
a
I want to
thing.
say that
So
too.
like,
Like, I do want to reiterate the fact that I watched it that first time, right? And I've never rewatched anything except for season 3, episodes 14 or 7. It's a 7 one. I know that, the Pine Barrens, because it's such an interesting episode of television that, like, if there's one episode of The Sopranos that I can celebrate over and over again, it's the Pine Barrens. It's just a great episode of TV. Check it out if you've never seen it. So maybe all of that stuff was there and I just wasn't watching critically enough to pick up on it. But in terms of my memory of the show, no. And let's be honest, it's because there's also 5 more seasons that overshadow that one season we saw Tony Soprano dealing with his mother.
right, yeah,
I mean, I think that's a lot on The Sopranos. We talked about The Sopranos for a while, and I don't really want to go back and rewatch it. But you're not wrong about the Shakespearean, because there was a moment that happened in the movie where I'm like, this is just Shakespeare. And,
yeah,
like, So it's meant to be quick, easily consumed, and then forgotten. Because that's what
But
Shakespeare really was.
But yeah, but I mean, but in terms of the ways that we talk about TV and theater and film now, when we say Shakespearean, like things like he is seeing ghosts, things like he
Yeah.
does have this weird relationship with his family, things like there is a lot of play with morality and things like that. It's the first time that I remember like people in my life and like not just like film critics, but like my mom and dad talking about it in terms of like comparing it to King Lear and Macbeth and things
Yeah.
like that.
Well, this one's got a lot of Othello in it. Take from
Oh,
that whatever you will.
okay.
It's
All right.
Othello and I guess Macbeth is there, and a little bit of Hamlet too.
Yeah.
If I was going to talk about the things that do it, and that's all scenes that don't involve Tony Soprano. That's
Yeah.
all Dicky Molosanto stuff. So I mean, it's if you enjoyed it, maybe it's worth watching. Take your own stuff from it, but just if you haven't watched The Sopranos in a while, don't be surprised. Is I guess the final. All right. So the last thing, I got this big new monitor that we were going to talk about. You said you had questions off
Well, I guess my
mic.
biggest question was you said you were going to be testing it out for a while, and I was like, wait, are you like on some like special program? Like, are you sending it back at some point, or is this
I mean,
yours?
yeah, that's sort of it. Is that like I was able to test it out? It's sort of like a beta thing of it. I don't know. I signed up. I got the okay to do it. I got it earlier than it was supposed to release, so it feels special. I don't know.
So, but like you're not going to be able to. This is not your new monitor.
No, at least not now. I don't know what's going to happen with it. But right now it's just putting it through its paces and seeing what it does.
Yeah. So what have you been doing with it, man?
Um, the first thing that I did with it is, well, just setting it up. You know what I is the problem with every modern monitor setup is a lack of ports.
Yeah, I don't disagree, man. I think that's true on all devices. I think computers as well have a real, unless you're going out of your way to specify that you want a certain number of ports of certain types available to you, then it's just assumed you don't want any. I don't know why.
Yeah. So the number one best part about this guy right here is it's got 5 ports.
Nice.
It's got a 1.4 display port, which is running into my PC. It has two, and it's one of the first monitors to have it, HDMI 2.1 ports. And,
Ooh.
like, that's what PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X output over. So, in order to get the graphics that those systems promise, you have to be on a TV that has an HDMI 2.1 port, or this is one of the first monitors that actually has that.
Yeah, so if you ever hear anybody talk about how that's a ridiculous claim because no TV is capable of that, and you're just like, well, they wouldn't claim it if it wasn't capable. No, this is exactly what we mean.
Yeah.
When the PlayStation first came out and said we're going to require this particular port, and everybody gave them shit because they said no TV, and like no normal person owns a TV that can handle that right now, and that was kind of like a big like a big knock against them. But then by the time Microsoft announced we're going to also do that, it was kind of just like, yeah, well, maybe now that both consoles are going to support this, maybe more TVs are going to need to actually include it. So yeah, here we are 2 years into that, or I guess a
Yeah.
year into
Almost a
PlayStation.
year. Almost a full year after the PS5 and the Xbox Series X came out. Monitors are finally coming out that have it. And most of the companies have it too. Like Acer has one that does it. And like Eve, which Eve is a whole other thing because I almost pre-ordered a monitor from them, but then it doesn't come with a stand. A stand was $100 extra,
Jeez.
and it was 3 months shipping. Like you would order it and it would ship, but you wouldn't get it for 3 months due to the nature of it coming from like Asia and customs and all sorts of other
Well,
stuff.
Eve is a lot like what Vizio was 15 years ago, right? Like they technically normally make parts for other companies, don't they?
I think so. I don't know. Eve is weird in terms of that sort of thing because they really lean heavily into the like Kickstarter crowdfunding of it, where they'll
Okay, that's what
present
it
a
is.
they'll present a product, and then if enough people show an interest in it via pre-orders, then that product will be made.
Okay.
So like the PS5 came out and Eve was like, you can do it. You can pre-order this $700 monitor, $100 down right now. And then they didn't start shipping out until August of this year.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like, well, I'm kind of glad I waited, right? And I had wanted to get a bigger monitor, but the issue is that all the 32-inch monitors that I could find out there, PCs detected them as televisions. They weren't detected as actual monitors.
Depending on how you were doing the output, or just period.
Just the way that the porting was done and the way that like the image was created by the actual hardware, right. It was like using TV parts. So the computer was convinced that it was a television.
Yeah, some piece in there was just not allowing it to register it as a PC monitor.
Right. So that you wouldn't have the option to go any higher than 60 hertz or anything like that. So like that's why I'm like, well, I'm gonna wait. And then I found this one and I threw myself on the list and everything happened with it. So yeah, and then you also have two HDMI 2.0 ports. And like that's what's necessary for the PS4 Pro to have like the HDR and the 4K output. Mm-hmm. So like 5 ports, I don't feel like everything is hooked up to this thing right now.
Yeah.
And it feels nice to not have to use like switches or anything like that. And the fact that it can just detect it. The second thing I did was play Avengers on it because I love the Avengers game. I've got another character up to level 50, and I'm very close with Thor. I got him to 47 last night from 26. Ooh. 4 times experience weekend, man. I love it. And it looks really, really good. The game's really good at like a steady 60 frames and with the dynamic range of lighting. So like what these systems are capable, it's nice to actually see it on display. It's disgusting that everything about it right now, but what are you gonna do? Yeah. And then the third thing I did was learn that the Xbox Series X is the superior console.
Oh,
and that was kind of hard to swallow, but if what we're going to talk about is what these systems can do, what they can create, what they can produce graphically, the XSX is the clear winner. And I didn't think I'd be the person saying that, but it's kind of true. Like, my PC, I've hooked it up to monitors. I've had 144 hertz. I've even had, like, the 280 overclocking hertz for certain things. Like, I had an Asus monitor that could do that. Ended up I didn't love that monitor, and I ended up returning it because it was a refurb model. And the reason why it was originally returned and had to be refurbished is it couldn't hold on to settings. Like that part of it was damaged. So I'm like, I'm not resetting my monitor every time that I turn it on.
Of course, right?
That's infuriating and annoying. So like I've seen that stuff before, but the PS5 is locked at 4K 60 frames per second, right? And that's if you're in like performance mode. And then like they have another mode where it like has the ray tracing and everything, and that's locked at 30 FPS. Mm-hmm. And I know that like that might not sound like a big deal, but like that's where we're at now. The frames per second of the produced like video and graphics is kind of the 8-bit versus 16-bit of it all.
Okay.
Or 32-bit to 64-bit, right? Like it's not about bits anymore. It's about FPS. It's about the 4K. It's about the high dynamic range. And the Xbox, first of all, the Xbox detected right away that it was connected via HDMI 2.1 and was like, so we've updated all of the settings to make sure that you're getting the best quality graphics when they are available, right? Everything that I've played that is an Xbox Series X game, right, or has an Xbox Series X mode, is a steady 120 frames per second. They're only dropping like during like load screens, but that generally happens anyway. Like transitions. The one that I used with because I have an FPS counter that I can show. I played Hades, and Hades was like a buttery smooth, gorgeous 120 frames per second.
Cool.
And I'm just like, this is awesome. Like, this is what it can be. Like, I feel immersed in the game because there aren't those small things taking me away from it. To set your performance mode on PlayStation 5, I'm still not sure. I've read
It's
4 different descriptions on how to do it. And what it really comes down to is on a game by game basis. There's no like universal way to do it, which
okay.
like you can tell it to always default to performance mode, but then some games will still not do that, and you have to end up going in and doing it in the game itself, which just defeats the purpose as far as I'm concerned. But what are you going to do?
Yeah.
And I mean, everything I've played on the PS5, it looks gorgeous, right? Like, like clearly the graphic fidelity is there, and what you're getting with the PS5 is more dedication to like the content, right? You're going to get God of War, you're going to get the sequel to Horizon Zero Dawn, so you're getting a PlayStation mostly for the IPs. But if you just want to like game, like the Xbox Series X seems to be the way to go.
Well, especially because the Series X is still doing all sorts of stuff with like the payment plans and stuff like that too,
Yeah.
right? And they're like available to people. It's astounding to me how well, and this may be just an American thing. Like I want to make sure that I make that clear too, is that like whatever is going on in Europe and Asia as far as these consoles go, I am completely disconnected from the last year or so, ever since the new consoles came out. But like, I cannot believe the ways in which that Microsoft has made sure that everybody can get a like product in hand and do something with it, and that PlayStation has just not. He's like, I besides you and a couple of other people on my friends list, then the only reason I know they have them is because it says on their PS5. I don't know many people that are like feeling the need to go to a PS5 yet. I know a lot of people that are super excited to. A lot of things that are like people are just like, yeah, once I can afford it and once there's one actually around me, like I'm gonna do this thing. But like I the fact that we can't find it is not wrecking my day.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
I get that.
And so like it's just it's really wild to me that we are a year into this console generation. I mean, it is a new generation, and I don't. I feel nothing in terms of needing to get onto a PS5 right now. And I always said I was going to wait until I needed to get one / could get one that to actually buy in. And I still feel that way. It just hasn't come up yet. You know, whereas like you and I over the last couple of months, I've had a few conversations about the idea of maybe investing in the new Xbox, just because like there's at least something going on there. Again, I'm not feeling like a need. I don't feel like I'm missing out on anything by not having one in the house, but like couple of times I have thought that'd be cool to try. And the fact that I've said that a few times about the Xbox and not at all about the PS5 it says something. And you know, I'm not saying that one is superior to the other. I'm not going to plant that flag. Like I mean it's great that the graphical fidelity is definitely there with Xbox in a way that is still questionable with the PlayStation, but I have stood by the fact that over the last 2 generations we have gotten to such minuscule measurements on what is graphical fidelity that like and this might just be old man Siegen talking, I don't see it. And if I don't see it, I don't care. Like I know watching something in 120 frames running perfectly and all that looks really beautiful and cool, but I play Hades on my Switch right now, and definitely I'm not getting those kinds of frame
Right.
rates, and I'm still having a grand old time. So like, I'm good.
Yeah. It's just that it's the fact that everything I loaded with that went to it.
Hmm.
I mean, the story has always been that the Xbox Series X is more powerful under the hood, but like you really don't get to see that until you're actually using the stuff that takes advantage of that.
Right. And so like then that becomes a whole other question: is it a bell curve situation where the Xbox is not as good as the PlayStation until you get onto this high end monitor, until you get into these high end situations, and then suddenly boom, it surpasses the PlayStation in every way. Well, that's fine, but if I'm still 10 yards back on the bell curve, like that doesn't matter to me. I need the PlayStation because right now at this level where like maybe my internet is not as good as yours, maybe like there's all of these other reasons that are getting in the way of my console performance, and the PlayStation holds better in shittier conditions, then the PlayStation might still be the better choice.
Right. Even though I'm saying that, like, in terms of graphics alone, Xbox Series X definitely has that edge. I mean, I'm playing more of my PlayStation 5. Like,
Hmm.
that's the stuff, like, the games that I want to play are there. You
Yeah.
can't get over the fact that, like, I'm playing Avengers. I'm somebody who's playing Avengers. I'm taking advantage of it. Avengers came to Xbox Game Pass this past week, right?
Hmm.
I haven't played Avengers on my Xbox. As much as I want to do that, I want to see what carries over because you have to have a Square Enix account. I want to see if the stuff that I've bought, like my skins and things that I've invested in, will carry over. Because I
Right.
certainly hope that they will. But then look at how, like, Destiny worked between consoles.
Yeah, I mean they can promote the hell all they want out of things like crossplay, but if crossplay does not also mean cross save, then like I don't care.
Then it doesn't matter to
Like
me. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, like I love that I can play with my friend that is on a different console, but I'm not going to change consoles if I can't, you know what I mean? And I'm sure that they would rather that I buy the game 3 times. So like if that's the case, then let me bring over my silly shit. Let me bring over my costumes. Let me bring over my saved game. I'll buy it on a different system if all my stuff comes with me. Sure, here's 60 more bucks. Like keep making your game. But if you don't want to do that for me, that's fine. You don't need my money.
Yeah, it doesn't incentivize me to spend more money. Is the fact of it, and I'm excited to see going forward if it coming to Xbox Game Pass is going to be the shot in the arm that the game kind of needs. I mean, I say that despite the fact that they've already said they're going to give us another year worth of content, right? And this will be a discussion to have next year if we're getting a year 3 of Avengers or if we're getting a sequel or however they're going to continue the ecosystem. They might not, considering
Yeah.
all of the other Marvel properties that are destined to get games going forward. They might
Yeah.
let this one die on the vine, so we'll see. But yeah,
I will say that one of the first things that I heard when they announced that it was going to be available on Game Pass was everybody saying, "Yup, but not Spider-Man."
yep,
So
and
that's
that and
still
that's
the
the and that's the
narrative.
thing. The only one that I would pay money to play the game on is still PlayStation because inherently it is the better value.
Yeah, I like, and exclusivity is terrible. We've talked about that and we've beaten that horse and well past dead. But like, I just cannot. I can't believe that they're still going forward with that, considering all the trouble that they've had. One of the best things that they could do to really give Avengers a really good shot in the arm to bring people back, to continue your metaphor, is announce Spider-Man will be available on all of these versions, even if it's like 2 months later. Just saying Spider-Man will be available on the Xbox, Spider-Man will be available on the PC. I know that there's a good contingency of people that will then say, now I will give it a try. And it's shitty that's the way that they feel, and it's weird that they don't want to experience 99% of the game because 1% is not free to them. But I know that would definitely do something for them.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's as much as you say it, it's a value thing. You're saying to the PlayStation, you're saying to the PC and the Xbox users that the game is worth less because they're not getting all of the content.
Yeah.
And the real issue is more because, like, look at Soul Calibur 2, right? Soul Calibur 2 on GameCube you got Link, on PlayStation 2 you got Hayachi, and on Xbox you got Spawn, right? So everybody kind of got something, and even if the more valuable character there was Link for most people, if you happen to only have a PlayStation 2 or an Xbox, you're not getting FOMO. You're not being left out of the conversation. You're
Mhm.
still getting something that's special and unique to you.
Right.
And the PC and the Xbox people, they're not getting that. And
Yeah,
there's no
there's
way
not
to
something for
get
them.
that. Like,
Yeah.
what would it be? Well, that then wouldn't also go to PlayStation eventually. What we
Right.
give them, you get She-Hulk 3 months earlier than it comes to PlayStation, but then eventually PlayStation has Spider-Man and gets She-Hulk. Like, there's
Exclusive for
no.
Google Stadia. Howard the Duck. Thank you.
I would love it.
Yes.
I mean, it was on sale on Google Stadia, and I almost bought it. But then that thing in the back of my head is, but I'm not going to get Spider-Man there. I'm not
Yeah.
going to have the complete version of the game.
No matter what version you ask me to buy, because there's also still three versions of that game available. There's the
Right.
main version, there's the gold version, and then there's like the like Wakanda gold box nonsense bullshit version that they had for a while. I don't know if that's
Yeah.
still available, but like yeah. And you want me to spend $100 on this game, knowing full well that on this particular console, I'm not going to get everything out of it. No thanks.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate thing going there. But overall, my time with this thing has been great. I have it for a few more, and then who knows what's going to happen. But I will say this, Old Man CJ might not be able to notice a difference, and I get that. But being able to actually make out what things on the screen are is very cool for something like Avengers. To like understand, oh, that's what that guy's supposed to look like.
Yeah, and I don't mean to say that I don't see a difference.
Right.
It's that the difference I see is not enough to make me care.
To make you,
And so
I get
like
that, yeah.
I need that moment. I need that moment where I see a thing in a video game and for the first time go like, "Oh, if only I'd been able to see this. Now I can play this game." That just doesn't happen. And it shouldn't happen because a lot of people out there are not going to be able to afford this kind of setup in order to play games. So you can't make your game literally unplayable unless you're on this. Looking at you, PC culture. But like this idea being like you need this setup in order to actually progress in a game, that is horrendous. That should not be the case, and it's not currently the case. So until something comes along that puts me in that really awkward position, I'm just not gonna. I'm not gonna be able to get behind this idea of a $700 monitor.
Yeah. I mean, the fact is, 10 years ago, I got my first flat screen television. Up to that point, I had only ever been playing on, CRTs and everything like that. And people were like, I can't believe you actually got the Platinum Trophy for Uncharted on a CRT. And then I got a flat screen TV, and I'm like, oh my God, it's so different. Like, I understand why people were saying, like, I can't believe that you could play that game and, like, get the 30 headshots in a row based on what the graphics look like on a CRT with the flicker and everything. And now 10 years later, getting a thing like this, I understand those people who are like, it's different when you're playing in 120. It's different when it's actual 4K, not just like doubled lines.
Well, I hope they don't go and take that monitor back on you then.
Well, you know what? We'll see. I mean, you sign up for this stuff. I can't even believe I got picked and then it actually happened, right?
Yeah,
all the stuff that happens in the world today. But yeah, eventually I will have to upgrade to it. So we'll see what happens when it happens. But I think that's everything that I have to say this week. Anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, man, there hasn't been too much going on. I've been playing a lot of chill games lately. I replayed Going Home recently, Donut County. I just finally bought into Untitled Goose Game, like in full. And so just like a lot of really laid back, like inoffensive games that are just not asking too much of my brain. That's the other side of this, is that like right now where I am at in my game playing this, like investing in some kind of crazy monitor or setup or new generation console, none of that really makes sense for me because I'm just not in that space as far as games go at the moment.
I get that. I can understand that. I've just been sort of doing cleanup on things. I've loved Hades because as much as I'm invested in it, I feel like I can lift myself out of it as quick as possible. But I'm really gearing up for this Friday and the release of Metroid Dread. And then I want to hit it hard going back into it with games that like...
I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about it.
Yeah, me too, because when it first aired, I'm like, I'm not going to get it. And then I'm like, I can't not play a Metroid game when it's new. Because if you don't play it when it's new, you're going to look up how to solve the puzzles.
Or hear about it.
Yeah,
people
exactly.
are going to, especially the circles that you float in, you're going to hear about
I'm
it.
going to hear about it. And it's one of those ones where like, no, I want my own experience with it, and then I can see what happens. So last thing, I just thought of this. Cry Macho is on HBO Max right now and in theaters. It's there till October 17th. Watch it. It's delightful. It's just a delightful little film. I cannot believe I enjoyed it as much as I did. I thought it was going to be it's a Clint Eastwood, and it's, I mean, if you like Westerns, it'll probably like be a a more enjoyable experience. I'm not even really a Western guy, but the story was so engaging. It's so well acted. It's beautiful. Like the whole, it was experience. I wish that I had watched Many Saints of Newark before Cry Macho instead of the other way that I had done it. Because cool. Many Saints just left a bad taste in my mouth. Cry Macho left me hungry for more.
Yeah, I did do Night Books this week because it dropped, and I've been really excited about it. It's the Sam Raimi produced. He didn't write or direct or anything, but the Sam Raimi produced Halloween movie on Netflix that's all about the kid that gets kidnapped by a witch and like a la like Arabian Nights has to tell her a story every night or she's gonna eat him. It's a hell of a good time. It is just to give you kind of like a feel like I don't recommend you always do this, but ratings wise, it's a TV PG experience, and so like that means I don't mean that in terms of equality, but in terms of I know there's a lot of people out there that don't know how to really dive into scary movies and things like that. That's the level at which we're talking about. It is definitely scary. There's definitely a couple of good jumps and stuff like that, and some gross stuff in it and things like that are just really fun. But there is just something really cool about the style of it. A lot of it takes place in just like four rooms of an apartment, and that in of itself is actually really like interesting. How well that apartment like sets itself up as the space, and then there are these moments that are outside of the apartment that are just gorgeous. Like there's some stuff in the third act that gets revealed story wise, and the way that the set has to change because of that is really wild and really cool. So it's got a lot of really goofy Sam Raimi-ness to it while not being a Sam Raimi like experience. And so if that doesn't get you though, like the acting in it is just phenomenal. The kid in it I raved about a couple of years ago because he was the one in Timmy Failure, the Disney Plus original when Disney Plus first dropped.
Yeah.
And he was phenomenal in that movie, and he's just as good in this. I don't think this movie is nearly as emotionally demanding as that one was, but he's just a blast to watch as the storyteller, which I think is his character name the entire time in this thing. I don't think he's ever given a full name. There's all sorts of really cool elements in it.
All I'm thinking of is Tales from the Dark Side of the movie. That's very exciting to me.
Yeah, so there is that element to it, but it is so well. It is not an anthology movie. There's an anthology aspect to it that is really fun, but don't go in expecting like Creepshow. It's not that. That is definitely an influence, though. I will say that.
Cool. Very cool. Awesome. All right, so if you have any other Halloween suggestions for Siegen, I know he likes to start collecting them as soon as October starts. You can find him on Twitter at Siege versus the World.
And if you have anything else you think Dev should check out on his fancy new monitor, if there's something crazy that he can only experience there, you can catch him at Devin D. Decker.
All right. So until next time, Will, why don't you bring us home, buddy? Have a nice night, folks.
Thank you for listening to the Say Report with your host, Devin Decker and Stephen Serwick. Please follow the guys on Twitter and Facebook by searching for The Say Report, and you can always subscribe on your podcast channel so this is delivered straight to you and you can enjoy it every week. With apologies to your mother, we'll see you next time.